Hi, my name is Dan and I'm one of the DT evangelists here at Digital Tutors. In this video, we're going to look at a question from one of our users, Snard, on how to help pinpoint what could be causing a render to not finish quite as expected. Okay, so to give this example, I just have a scene from the Introduction to Maya 2011 course. Now, anytime I render out, say if I were to just come in here and do a preview render, it's always helpful to check the script editor to see if there's any errors that come back. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick render here. And as we can see, this render in particular came back as we would expect. But if we didn't, or we had any sort of errors, we could come down to our script editor and take a look at any errors that might have come up. In this case, we had a warning, but it wasn't enough to cause the render to fail. Now, another helpful tip would be to go in and clean out the scene before you actually start to render, because MentalRay is going to take into account everything that you have in your scene. So if you have a whole bunch of extra nodes in there, then you can clean those out before you actually render. So to do that, we can come to File and into File and into the Optimize Scene Size. Let's open up the option box. We can see all these different options for things to clean out. Say if we wanted to get rid of all of our NURBS curves, maybe extra animation clips, any extra locators that may not be using. We can choose any sort of things we may want to optimize just to help clean up the scene before we actually render. Okay, so I can click Optimize. It's going to tell us this action is not undoable. So it's always a good idea to actually save out a copy of your scene before you perform an optimization. That way you can always go back to it if you need to. Okay, I'm just going to click OK. Once again, if we open up our script editor, we can see the results of that process. We can see it's cleaned out a couple extra group nodes, an extra deformer. That's just going to help clean up the scene a little bit and may help the render come back all right. Now, another tip we could do would be to actually run render diagnostics, and that'll really help to pinpoint where some of the issue may be. So to do that, we'll go to Render and run render diagnostics. What that's going to do is that's going to automatically open up our script editor and give us any sort of warnings or errors that will be caused by rendering out this scene. Now, in this particular case, it looks like we may want to go in and adjust some of the resolution on one of our images, one of our textures. But since these particular ones are just warnings, it shouldn't be enough to actually cause the render to fail. But if you did get any actual errors coming back, those would be things that you'd want to take a look at solving and troubleshooting. Okay, now the last thing we want to take a look at would be how to adjust the actual memory limit for when it renders so that MentalRay won't run out of memory. So to do that, we'll go to Render, Batch Render. Let's open up the option box. In the option box, we have a couple different options in here. Right now, MentalRay is going to automatically choose how much memory it needs to use. So say if we had a few gigs of RAM on our system, we may want MentalRay to only use 1 gig of RAM. We can type in 1024, and then when we batch render, MentalRay is only going to use that set amount of RAM. So that's a look at how we can run some simple diagnostics on our renders. Now, if you're still having some issues with rendering, I'd really recommend checking out the MentalRay Tips and Tricks course, as that course goes over some great ways to do things like caching maps, checking the BSP tree, all in an attempt to increase MentalRay's render performance.